Picture a courtroom drama. Let's say someone's on trial for a murder. All pieces of evidence that the lawyer of the accused will present would be to try and convince the judge or the jury more than before that the person's actually innocent. Similarly, on the flip side, all pieces of evidence presented by the other lawyer, the prosecutor, would be to try and convince the judge or the jury more and more that the person is actually guilty. Each piece of evidence on its own need not be enough to get the judge to the final destination that the lawyer wants them to get at. Yet, it's a journey. Each piece of evidence should get them even more convinced than they were before, of whatever side the lawyer's trying to argue. Right? That's the objective of every piece of evidence that the lawyers will present. When it comes to CR, strengthen, and weaken questions, we can treat the answer choices as such additional pieces of information. The correct answer, let's say for a strengthen question, would be an additional piece of information that increases the belief in the argument compared with before. Just the way in a courtroom case, one piece of evidence need not directly take the judge to believe that the accused is guilty or not, but it should just change the belief. Similarly, the correct answer in a strengthen question need not take us to understand that, oh, now certainly the conclusion is valid. No. All that a correct answer needs to do is increase our confidence in the argument, our confidence in the main point compared with before. Let's understand this more with an example. Let's say John is standing outside a Starbucks, and we're wondering whether John can afford a Starbucks coffee or not. As of now, we don't know anything about John apart from the fact that he's standing outside a Starbucks. What if I tell you now that John is a CEO of a Fortune 500 company? John is the CEO of a Fortune 500 company. Based on this additional piece of information, do we now know for sure whether he can afford a Starbucks coffee or not? We don't know for sure, right? Maybe he's the CEO, however, he's got all his money invested in different streams. In fact, maybe he's got a lot of loans on his head. However, once this information comes to light, compared with before, our confidence certainly goes up. We now definitely believe more than we did earlier that, yeah, if he is the CEO of a Fortune 500 company, then probably he can afford a Starbucks coffee. What if instead of the CEO of a Fortune 500 company, what if I mentioned he's the CEO of a well-funded startup? In this case also, maybe not as much as before, but still our belief will change in the same direction. Our confidence will go up compared with before. Maybe it won't go up as much as it would have had he been the CEO of a Fortune 500 company, but even if he's the CEO of a well-funded startup, our confidence still goes up. What if we learn that he's been jobless for the last 6 months and that's the only piece of information that we have about John? If this piece of information comes to light, then compared with before, I'll start doubting whether he can really afford a Starbucks coffee, right? Again, is it possible that he has immense savings from his last job and he actually can afford the coffee? Sure, that's possible. No one's debating those possibilities. However, initially, when I did not have any information about John, the only thing I knew was that he was standing outside a Starbucks coffee. And now that I have this additional piece of information, just one additional piece, that he's been jobless for the last 6 months, compared with before, I now believe less that he can afford a Starbucks coffee, right? My belief in his ability to afford a Starbucks coffee has gone down compared with before. That's what we're after when it comes to strengthen and weaken questions. We're not looking for certainties, we are looking for what happens to our confidence level. Does it go in either direction? If so, in which? If our belief doesn't change at all, I term that as this statement has no impact on the argument. If our belief changes ever so slightly, that means it does have an impact. Then it remains to figure out in what direction was the impact there. If our belief in the conclusion in the argument goes up, that means the arguments got strengthened. If our belief goes down, that means the arguments got weakened. Let's take another example. Bob. Let's talk about Bob now. Bob's driving a Mercedes, therefore Bob is rich. Is this an argument? Yes. What's the main point? That he's rich. What's the basis of reaching the main point? The basis that the author used was the fact that he's driving a Mercedes. So, does it make absolute sense for someone who's driving a Mercedes to be rich? Well, no. There could be so many other reasons behind a person driving a Mercedes also. We'll not get into those reasons right now, but what if, again, I present the same two pieces of information? What if, first, I tell you that he's the CEO of a well-funded startup? In this case, although him being a CEO of a startup has got nothing to do with him driving a Mercedes, yet, overall, compared with before, do I believe more in the conclusion? I do. On the flip side, if I learn he's been jobless for the last 6 months, compared with before, do I now believe less in him being rich? In him being rich? I do believe less. So, again, the same two pieces of evidence in this argument also do change my belief. So this brings in another important point. The right answer need not necessarily be something that the passage has already talked about. In fact, it would be a new piece of information, something that wasn't already covered in the passage. It might seem unrelated initially, however, that's not the way to evaluate these answer choices. The way to evaluate is just to think about what impact do those answer choices have on the argument. Hope that made sense.